Welcome to Eternal Journey, the podcast.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of Eternal Journey, the podcast that talks about all things eternal with a focus on limited play. I'm your host, Jedi, aka Caesar the Crowd Pleaser, and today for episode 32, we're going to be talking about salvaging a train wreck. That's right. Sometimes we occasionally have a draft where we're not quite sure what signals we're trying to read or what direction we want to go in. Maybe some cards just aren't in the packs, period. And eventually halfway through pack 2, you start to feel like you have no idea what's going on with your draft. And we consider those a train wreck. So today we're going to be talking about how to salvage a train wreck and make the most out of the picks that you've made so far up until that point where you decide like, okay, I really need to lock something down before I just have a straight up unplayable deck. So I think it's something that will help everyone, because every once in a while I know it's happened to me, sometimes on stream, sometimes not, where I just halfway through pack 2 or even pack 3 here in Eternal, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So we're going to talk about that today. But first, as usual, I want to mention the YouTube channel that is EJthePodcast on YouTube. That's right. That's where you can find all the content that I produce, whether you can catch me live on Twitch or not. I post event videos, I post tournament videos, I post sealeds, I post drafts. All of it is right there on the YouTube channel. So definitely check it out. Throw a subscribe up that way so you get notified whenever I throw new videos. I've been averaging about 2 videos a week, give or take, based on real life commitments and stuff. But yeah, that's about what I like to average. I think that's a healthy amount of new content for you guys to check out. So definitely check that out, EJ the Podcast, or just go ahead and type in Eternal Journey on your search engine and it should come up. Next up, of course, like I just mentioned, you can catch me streaming live every Sunday, Monday, Tuesday mornings at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. Come hang out. Let me know what you think about this draft format. Let me know what you're thinking about the new spoilers that are coming up and things like that. I would love to hear your views and just come kick it with a great community. I think I have a super friendly following. We all get along quite well. And yeah, I'll try to get better together. All right. This moves us down to our shout out section of the week. No new subscribers today, so that's okay. Just want to give a shout out to all my resubs. Really appreciate you guys' continued commitment and support. It really does mean a lot to me. It's super exciting. I went ahead and finally got some new badges up there on the Twitch channel. So you get the EJ logo for your first badge. Then when you hit 3 months, you get a Jedi lightsaber. When you hit 6 months, you hit a Darth Maul lightsaber. That's right, the double-sided red lightsaber. You get Yoda when you hit 9 months, and then the year followers or subs get Darth Vader. Super excited about those. But yeah, definitely check it out. Really, really appreciate that. I want to give a shout out to a couple of fellow streamers that were kind enough to raid me this week. So I really, really do appreciate that. Both Just a Lazy Gamer and Sunnyvale with the return raids. That's right, back-to-back raids from them. So I really do appreciate that. Ended up ending the, I believe, Tuesday stream with about 200 people watching, which is pretty impressive, not gonna lie. I do appreciate that. New Zirben, returning streamer as well, that has rated me before. I really do appreciate that. Definitely check him out. Quite interesting brews he does on his channel. And then Blue Sky Drag. I know it's dragon in Dutch. Oh, he's gonna kill me. I so apologize. Danish. I think it was Danish. Yes. Polish? My bad. I slept since then, so I do apologize, Blue Sky. I really do. I try to be a little bit better about the details, but forgive me, guys. I am human. I am still consider myself fairly new to the streaming game, so I do have a notebook. I'm not gonna lie. I have notes that I write down on certain people and stuff, so I can try to better keep track of that. But I wanted to give a shout out to all those guys. Appreciate them throwing some love my way, and hopefully I can return the favor from time to time. Okay, one last thing. It's kind of a weird, I really don't know where I want to stick this, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it now. Something that came up in one of the more recent drafts. So Olivia, for those of you that don't know, I'll pull it up real quick just because I actually had the pack one pick one set up. Let me set up. Olivia is a 3-cost shadow unit. All right, there you go. She's up on screen for those of you viewing this on YouTube. She is a 3/2 elf shaman for 3 shadow. She has lifesteal, and units with endurance can't block. So pretty relevant. You know, it stops things like the 3/5 relic excavator. Stops that. Things stops lookout from blocking. So that is relevant text. It is a rare. And then it has an onslaught trigger. Play a 1/1 disfigure on an enemy unit, right? Pretty simple. I think everyone knows that. But this week, the additional line of text, which now I come to find out not many people knew about either, so I don't feel so bad about it. And each enemy unit with the same name. So play a -1/-1 disfigure on an enemy unit and each enemy unit with the same name. That is relevant in this format. I wanted to say that because it 100% caught me off guard. I had the ability of 2-for-1ing my opponent, and I did not. Long story short, it dawned on me because I attacked with rats, they blocked, etc., and then I only attacked with 1 rat when I could have attacked with all 3 because I just wanted to trigger her onslaught, hoping they would block. Right? They'd be like, "Oh, it's an onslaught trigger, I'll block." You really don't play around rares very often because you don't see them as often. And my opponent did block as accordingly, and I play Olivia, and then all of a sudden both the strangers, because they end up having 2 Huru strangers, took them -1/-1, and I was like, oh no. So I could have attacked with all my rats, got in for 1 damage, and essentially like 2.5 for 1, or 2 for 1, and no, yeah, 2 for, not even 2 for 1, 2 for half. Because the rats would have been 2/3 of a card, so 2/3 for 1. Yeah, there you go. 2/3 for 2. Yes, 2 for 2/3. Jeez, I am batting 1,000, but I'm not gonna edit this out. Hopefully, you guys get a trip out of this little tongue twister conversation I'm doing to confuse myself. So I'm actually gonna leave this out for you guys because I do like expressing that I am human. So, but yeah, so that was relevant. Then it's funny because ironically, the very next game I play out on my rats, our opponent has Olivia because they seem to be running the mirror, and they decide to -1/-1 one of our strangers instead of minusing 1 our 3 rats, essentially killing all 3 rats with 1 fatal swoop. So they ended up just adding a -1/-1 to one of our other units instead. So I thought that was extremely interesting that they didn't read the additional text either. It typically doesn't come out in draft, but hey, it does sometimes, so I wanted to share that with you. Okay, time for a pack 1, pick 1. So let's go in reverse order this time, change things up. And to my surprise, of course, Death Pit. All units have charge for 3 time. It's a relic. Yeah, no, we're not playing this. I don't even think this thing sees playing constructed. Next up, we have Good Idea at the time. It's a 1 primal slow spell with warp. Transform a card in your hand to a random card. Yeah, some people are high on this. I am not. Don't like the randomness. I like to know what I'm getting. Next up, we have Cover Fire Marksman, the 2/2 gunslinger for 3 and a red, double damage, and when you shift it for 5, give one of your other units double damage until Cover Fire Marksman emerges. If you guys have been tuning into the stream, we use this comboed with Tremor Shocker or Stiggy Moloch or Behemoth to build our own Heretic Cannon. This card is awesome. I like this card quite a bit. But there is an argument against it with our final uncommon, which is Unseen Ghostblade, +4/+4 relic weapon for 6 and a green. As Onslaught, play an Emerald Incarnation with attack and health equal to the number of spells in your void. So these are both pretty good cards. I could see reasons for picking either or, maybe a color preference or an archetype preference. I think here I would take Cover Fire Marksman first. Reason being it is pack 1, pick 1. So Ghostblade is okay on its own. It's better when you have a little bit of synergies, i.e. adding like a little heavier on the spells, just a little bit. It doesn't have to be much. It is also 6-drop versus a 3 or a 5. So because of all of the versatility, they both only require 1 influence. So I'm going to take Cover Fire Marksman here. In the comments, we have Direwood Lurker, the 4/5 Lifesteal Dire Beast for 7 and a shadow with Shift 6. Not beating either of our commons. Granite Coin, Murderous Flock, Quicksilver Ooze, the 2/2 Ooze for 3 and a time. Pay 3 and twist Quicksilver Ooze to play a 2/2 blob. Another good card, but not better than the other two. Stone Scar Outfitter, which I feel like plays a similar role to Cover Fire Marksman, somewhat. Kasual Blade Bearer, Crooked Alley Guide, which is a phenomenal card there. 3/3 for 3 and a Shadow, Rogue, Summon Scout, and you can shift it for 1. So that's probably the next best common, I think. And then finally, Kasual Creator, the 4/4 for 4 and a Justice, and it cannot attack unless you play a spell. So yeah, guys, I think I would take Cover Fire Marksman, but I could see arguments for both Alley Guide as well as Unseen Ghostblade here in this pack. So one more thing I'd like to talk about real quick before we go into the main topic is a disclaimer about last week's show. So I just wanted to get a little more specific about the information that I gave you guys last week. We did a number crunching episode going into the science and math of splashing colors and fixing your power bases, etc., etc. So once again, I was using shiftstoned.com to calculate the numbers. And the numbers I was giving you were accurate, but I do want to throw in a little more specificity. I want to specify that there are 3 numbers that you get when you go on the website. The first number, which is the number I was using primarily, a percentage, was the chances of getting that number of influence on that given point in time of the game or turn. There is a second number, which is the chances of you hitting that amount of power in general at that turn. So for example, when we were using our battle mage, the number I was using was how often you will get double justice on that turn. But there is an additional number of how often you will get 3 power on that turn based on your power base. And then finally, there is a third number that combines the 2 because those 2 are relevant. And so it combines the 2 of them, giving you a number of when you will have not only 3 power, but also influence, the double influence on that specific turn. One other thing I wanted to mention just through feedback of the show is that for all intensive purposes, the color fixing mechanic, or what it counted and did not count on shiftstoned.com, counts anything that could produce that level of influence. So for example, including times, Trailmaker, and things like that also do count towards your influence when you plug them in. That's why I kept it to just Seek Power, because it covered all 5 colors regardless of what we were doing. So that's it. Just wanted to go ahead and put a little bow on last week's show. Make sure you guys were getting all the knowledge that I have and making sure it was as accurate as possible. So hopefully that helped clear things up. And with that, we will dive into our main topic, which is what to do about a train wreck draft. So first off, let's go ahead and start off with what are the forms of a train wreck. So typically this will happen somewhere around the end of pack 2 and in pack 3. I feel like if you end up going into pack 4 to realize that you have a train wreck draft, then you are in big trouble. Okay, so typically somewhere between the end of pack 2 and mid pack 3 is where you kind of start to be like, oh, something doesn't feel right. Let me look at my deck real quick and be like, we're good on creatures, right? Or units. And you look and you have like 8 units and you're like, oh crap. So here are the various forms of train wrecks. Now, granted, I will throw out the disclaimer that this is my own opinion on how to do this and techniques. If you do have a different way of combating this, by all means, mention in the comments below, or come hang out in the live stream on twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ and let me know, and let's talk some train wrecks. I think it's not quite a bad beat story. It's more like a comedy thing for us limited players, but hey, it is what it is, right? It leads to cool top deck X stories. So first one is too many colors and no direction on a primary. So this is a little, I don't know if this is really common or uncommon in this current format. There have been a couple of times where I have tried the whole 5 color and 4 color nonsense and realized that I really don't have a deck. Like picking the best cards up, it really has no direction. It looks like a Mod Podge of things. You either don't have a color or you are 100% 5 colors. And so your power base is all wonky because you're not really sure when you need what color. Things like that. Granted, once again, I could make the argument that you could make the argument that either happens quite often in this format because people are trying to go 4 and 5 color, or B, it doesn't happen all because the fixing is so good. So what are you talking about, Jedi? This is insane. I do this all the time. It's perfect. So either or, take it for a grain of salt. We can use this episode. It will somewhat focus on set 6.5 or Trials of Grodov format, but this is one of those kind of level up things where I feel like you can hit across the board multiple formats. Next up, you have too much top end. So you get super excited about all these flashy top end cards. They're super powerful. They do a lot of things. So you end up taking a couple of them, or what you think is a couple of them, and then later on when you look at your curve, you realize that you have only 1, 2 drop, 2, 3 drops, and then everything else 5, 6, 7s, and you're like, oh boy, what are we gonna do in the development portion? So that is another form of train wrecks, essentially. When you and I for all intents and purposes, I'm considering a train wreck any deck that is not your stereotypical build with a little bit of flexibility in it. And like, obviously, I'm not saying that's a train wreck if you don't have the exact cookie cutter shell of it, but when there's a noticeable tip to one of the extremes, and then you feel like, all right, I'm missing a certain part of my game that can just utterly crush me. Okay. Next up is too much development or early curve. Okay, this is a little different. We will talk about this later on. This is not where you are the aggressive deck and you are super low to the ground with only 2 and 3 topping off your curve with maybe 1 or 2 4 cost spells. That is not what I'm talking about here. That is a direction that is intentional. This is more like unintentional, where you're like, ooh, a cool ramp spell, ooh, a cool 2 drop, ooh, I want some fixing, and then before you know it, you're like, wait a minute. How do I win? I have no win cons. So, which can be a thing, because you have to remember, in limited, most decks are built around the mid-range format. So if you are low to the ground, that is fine. But if you don't have the aggressive style 2 and 3 drops that you're looking for to finish off the opponent early, you just have kind of, for example, 12 strangers. Yeah, your fixing's gonna be great, but let's just face it, 2/2 for 2 is just not gonna get you there. So that is another form of or you have a bunch of chars and things like that, and char is great, don't get me wrong, char is absolutely awesome, but when you're staring down a tremor shocker and a behemoth, char isn't gonna do much for you. So that's another version. Next up, you have the spells matters or control deck / not enough units. Same thing, you're like, oh, I'm building the relic deck. If we go back 2 formats or whatnot, you have the Aurelian or Corendon relics matters deck. So you go heavy relics, picking up all these relic synergies, and then next thing you know, you're like, oh, it's halfway to pack 3 and I have 8 units. I need to come up with 10 more units? Oh dear Jeebus. Which, once again, could be a thing. You go up against one of those aggro decks, you don't have enough units to come up the board, they'll just run you over. And finally, the 2 all-in a build-around. This happens quite a bit for streamers, because we always try to be extremely entertaining, or people that draft a lot, so they try to explore different things. And you see a build around early, like for example, Dizzo's Racket, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to do it. Or maybe Caleb's Sanctum, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to do it. So you start taking armor things highly, you start taking weapons highly, and then before you know it, you're looking around and same thing. You have all these great weapons to trigger Caleb's Sanctum and have them switch to something awesome, but then you're realizing, I don't have enough units to put this on. Yeah. Or vice versa, you have all these armor matters cards, but then not enough units, or maybe you're like, well, how am I going to gain life so I don't just die to this? Or, hey, what happens when I don't play Dizzo's Racket? So, yeah, those are some versions of the train wrecks. Let me know in the comments below if you have any other forms of train wrecks that you have experienced, and I'd love to add them to this breakdown. Okay, guys, so with that being said, about when should you identify that you have a train wreck? Once again, it's just revisiting this lightly because that is important. Somewhere around between halfway through pack 2 and the end of pack 3, I would say, is the absolute latest. We have the benefit, for those of you that do not know, when you draft paper Magic, i.e. in real life, you actually are not allowed to look at your picks unless you're in between packs. So for Magic, you draft 3 packs, you'll open up your pack, you'll draft all 14 cards and face down. And then before you crack open your second pack, you get a minute to look at your picks. Then you put those down and you pick all your 14 picks from the second pack. Once again, face down. Then you get another minute to look at all your picks, and then you open up your third pack and do your selection. So there is an advantage to drafting online or on Eternal, where you are able to look at your curve anytime you want. You can always be like, how many units do I have? How many attachments do I have? Etc. etc. So it's always really important to capitalize on that. It is good to practice some mental exercise or strength or energy or whatnot, and maybe not necessarily look every single pick, but and try to retain a little of that memory while you're picking. But it is important to also keep track of that. So somewhere I like to check in. If you guys watch me stream or watch my videos on YouTube, I go ahead and check in every once in a while. Be like, how many units are we at? You know, how many, especially when it comes to a tight pick of whether it's like a top end spell or a bottom end spell, or maybe a removal spell versus a 2-drop. I like to go back and double check and see what I'm building with. And it really does help me make a difference with really close picks. If it's something between, you know, replaceable 4-drop and maybe like a niche card or whatever, if I look and I'm like, I'm at 17 units, I only need 2 more to go or 1 more to go, yeah, that's fine, I'll take the niche card and see what happens. You know, a questionable combat trick, same thing. You go and look and be like, how many spells do we have? Because you do want to have some interaction. So you look and you're like, oh wow, I only have 2 spells. Yep, I'll take this medium combat trick because it's probably gonna make my deck more than the 22nd unit. So that's about when you want to be checking yourself and make sure. Pack 4 is really where you want to get your cleanup done and how you avoid train wrecks. All right, ladies and gentlemen, time for the important part, which is solutions to a train wreck. These are some of the things I do to mitigate the damage of a potential train wreck. Okay, so first up, and not my favorite, in fact, I have never done this, but it is an option, so I wanted to go ahead and discuss it very briefly at the beginning. And that is the resign button or quit button. That's right. If you have a train wreck, by all means, you can totally go ahead and just rare draft for Shiftstone, taking any rares and uncommons you see in every pack, finish off the draft, and then immediately go and click the resign button and start anew. I don't recommend this because every dog has its day and a broken watch is right twice a day. So if you are able to follow the steps that I'm about to list after this, there is a chance that you can rack up a couple of wins and get some of your money back. Plus, you never know. Playing with an underpowered deck typically causes you to tighten up your gameplay because you know you're on the back foot right from the get-go. So you try to maximize your card advantage. So that is number 1. Number 2 is to go full meme or do something for science. So what I mean by this is if it turns out that you're like, hey, this deck isn't really coming together the way I wanted it to, and I kind of don't really know what to do, well, then the easy thing is to, since you're already scrapping the draft, make the most of it, learn something from it, try something new. So you can go and look at your previous picks and be like, hey, I just picked this legendary that's 9 power. So you know what? Let's try to play it. Let's try to draft some heavy ramp and see how many times we could play it. Or, hey, I have a very aggressive curve. Let's see what happens when we build a deck that stays below 3 power. Or, once again, we go back to that Caleb Sanctum where it focuses on weapons on your units. It'd be like, all right, we got something going on. Let's go ahead and put this in our deck and see if we can pick up another one in pack 4 and or just start valuing weapons a little highly. Do things like that you see avid limited streamers do from time to time to kind of spice up the stream, but do it on your own. See what happens. You never know. You might play a rare that you never would, or see something and see what happens. And worst case scenario, maybe it does completely falter. For those of you who have been following me for quite a while, you remember that back in set 6 or straight Dark Frontier, I drafted pack 1 pick 1 Tazboo and had the intentions of playing him, and so I tried my best to draft a mono shadow deck, just to find out how often I'd be able to play him on curve or at all. And then I did something similar with Siditi in the current set, Trials of Brodoff. So we were do that kind of thing where if you already think that the draft is a wash, then might as well make the most of it and do something that you typically would not do. All right, I'm very victim of that. I do it more now that I'm streaming, but prior to that, I was very much a nuts and bolts spike-ish drafter where I tried to just draft a decent, somewhere between a 6 to an 8 out of 10 deck every single time. Try not to get any flashy with it, etc., etc. All right, so those are 2 options you could do so far. Going into our third option, This is pick a primary color and a secondary color and hope it comes together. So it seems pretty self-explanatory, but you'd be surprised how, let's go to our many colors, right? Let's just, even in the current set, right? You turn out that you're like, oh, you're picking pack 1 is strictly just picking the best card out of every pack. And then pack 2, you're picking the best card out of every pack, prioritizing fixing. And then by the end of pack 2, you're looking at it, you're like, man, I am straight up in 5 colors and my fixing is all over the place. I really don't know what's gonna happen. You know, or maybe you're even halfway through pack 3 and you're like, yeah, the fixing's just not here. You know, like all my early game is Xenon and I've got all these strangers for Rakano. So here you have to realize that you have much less of the draft left to make playables in your deck. So what this means is the earlier it is in the draft, the higher chances you have of playing your picks, right? Because it's still open. You can adjust your picks accordingly to make sure that the cards you want to play are playable. Later on in the draft, you have a significantly less amount of cards to pick to make the cards you want playable, right? So if you're trying to take a splash card in pack 1, you still have 3 whole packs to make sure you can splash it, right? Or if it makes your deck. Versus in pack 4, if you're taking a splash card, well, now you only have a pack left to try to make that card work, and which is significantly less. And so when you identify that, like, hey, you know what, I'm in too many colors and like I just don't know what my deck wants to do, or maybe you're like, hey, you know, I'm Xenon early and then Rakano late and my fixing doesn't really line up correctly because, or the vice versa. Let's do that. Let's say Rakano early and Xenon late and all your fixing is like Trailmaker and Awaken the Ages and stuff. You're like, well, wait, I need time early, but for fixing my time later, but I also need Fire and Justice to play my 2 and 3s drops. What's going on? So what you do here is you kind of bite the bullet and you need to solidify, put your foot down and be like, all right, let me look at my card quality. Okay, Xenon, Time, and Shadow are my best cards. Those are definitely the cards I want to play. And so the reason why I say you pick 2 colors is because, let's face it, it's limited and you're not always going to get what you want. So it is good to have, hey, I definitely want time. I have good time late game. I have good time early game. It's really important that I play my time as a priority. So you're like, okay, I'm going to start prioritizing time. Well, you very easily could get a pack where there's no time card in it, or the only time card in it does absolutely nothing for you. So you need to know what your secondary color is so you can then default to that. Now, granted, once again, there's fewer picks in the draft for you to select. So there is a chance that you may not get what you want, but this gives you the prioritizing what your highest potential value of cards in your deck allows you to keep picking cards so they are higher or more probable to be played in your deck. And somewhat salvaging, because then later in the game you can splash whatever other colors you need to fill in your curve. So you pick the primary color, you say, all right, I'm going to draft this highly. You pick your secondary color, be like, this is what I'm going to default to if my primary color is not available. And then you go in for the rest of the packs and see if it comes together by the end, if you have a deck that is feasible to you. Okay? Moving right along. And that also works with fixing too. If we go back to our example, let's say all your fixing is Rakano. Well, now you might want to take out your Time and Shadow early game and see what your deck looks like with a primary Rakano build, and then splashing for your Time and Xenon later in the game. And then if that seems to be somewhat feasible with a couple of inclusions from the last pack and a half, then that's where you have to go and prioritize Rakano, and then later on realize that you'll make do with, you're filling the gaps with those, hopefully those Xenon cards that you are able to play later. I hope that made sense. It made sense in my head, but I might have not explained it correctly. Anywho, those are 3 ways to salvage a train wreck. I really thought about putting like a train wreck sound effect in this podcast and just periodically playing it, but I feel like that would be a little too much. So moving right along to number 4. This is prioritize medium to low level level cards to fill up your curve. So going back to the too much top end or too much development or early game or early curve, right? So you look at your curve and you're like, wow, I am like mono 2 drops right now, and this is so not an aggressive deck. You're like, okay, so now you have to prioritize your later game, right? This is when now all of a sudden, if you're some kind of primal or something, you're going to pass on that premium frost elemental and go for your frost elemental is kind of a bad example because even though it is early game, it is a finisher being a 3/3 flyer. But let's say, I don't know, belligerent Yeti, right? It's a fine 2-drop, and you might have some furnishes to make it even better. But you see Jotun Snowmass, you're like, hey, I need some top end, I need some finishers, so you prioritize that. You're taking bigger casting cost curve, lurker, there you go, that's another one. The 4/5 lifesteal, right? That's one that I've seen in some decks, but I feel like it's a begrudging playable because there's so many replaceable cards at that level. So you're taking subpar cards to make sure you have some plays. A good example of this is let me look it up real quick. The 5 cost, I think it's Down Under or Drown Under. I do apologize. It just dawned on me. If not, I would have looked for it sooner. But this one is like a very medium Hold Under, I think is what it is. Yeah, Hold Under. Gosh, it came to me right. I was looking for it. Yeah, Hold Under is playable as a removal spell. Don't get me wrong. I've seen plenty of people play it. I've played it myself. It does some work. But, I mean, there's so many better cards at 5 that kill things. But once again, if you realize you're like, hey, I have no removal or I have minimal cards in the top, well, now you're going to prioritize that Hold Under over maybe a premium Frost Elemental. You're like, look, excuse me. So Frost Elemental is a great card. But if you realize you have plenty of 2s and 3s and 4s, but you have no way of getting other units off the board, well, now you're going to have to prioritize that Hold Under to make sure that your deck comes together, because you need to be able to interact in some form or fashion. So that is one of the ways. Another thing, same thing, flip that around. If you are absolutely lacking 2-drops, you're like, I have no early game. I have 1 Trailmaker, 1 Devotee, no 3s, and then my curve starts 4, 5, and 6. Well, you might have to pass on that Behemoth to take that the warping Roctodon. Obviously Behemoth is way stronger in power level, but you need to fill out your curve. You need to make sure that you don't get run over by every single aggressive deck you play against, or even mid-range decks that just curve out on you. And so you're gonna have to take these subpar cards or cards somewhere between the medium to low quality level or power level to fill out your curve, because curves are just as important. Early on in this podcast career, I talked about building a good curve because you can lose to your curve very easily. Much like what we said earlier in the train wreck form, where you kind of negate one part of your curve for power level and end up losing to it, just the basic decks that curve out. All right, and finally, we're going through these kind of quickly, but I feel like they overlap quite a bit, so hey, why not? I always give you guys long episodes. This one might be a little bit shorter, but we have prioritized the gaps in your current deck. So once again, it kind of goes back to your power curve, or like I was talking about removal. You have to stop and look at your deck and see where the gaps are, where the holes are, whether it's in your curve, whether it's units, whether it's spells. Like I mentioned earlier, it's great if you have a fantastic curve. Maybe you have some cards like Bare Arms or the Submerged Titan, where having additional units comes into play, makes a difference. Maybe you're the sack deck, so you want extra units to sack to your cards or fill up your void. But if you're 3/4 of the way through the draft and you realize that you don't have enough spells to interact, you could very easily get run over by a flyer, or if your opponent does have some interactive spells, because then if all your tricks are out on the board, well, then it's easy for them to play around your board versus trying to figure out what you have in your hand. And so that happens a lot when you start going to kind of niche archetypes like Spells Matters or Go Wide. You sit there and you start looking and you're like, all right, cool, I have all the token makers, I have all the things that pump my team, but wait a minute, I don't have anything in the 3 and 5 range, or once again, don't have removal or things like that. And so, or you're like, well, what am I gonna do if my opponent has a flyer? Or what am I gonna do if my opponent has 2 really big blockers? If they're Praxis and they have all these, or worse yet, Combray with all these big health units. And so those are the kind of things that you look for in your deck. And it could be a big thing. Like, I can't stress that enough. Sometimes you kind of go all in, especially in these niches, like I talked about earlier. Go back to Caleb Sanctum. Caleb Sanctum, I've seen it do some work. I actually built a constructed deck around it, and I think Sunnyvale did as well, and it did some work. So you want to try to do it in limited, and sometimes those things come together. The other day, I actually played against a Huru, Huru? Was it Huru or was it? Oh, Ixten. I'm sorry. It was Ixten Spells Matter, and they went all in because they had a display as well as a Sanctum, and that's his constructed play. So they kind of built that deck in limited. And it worked out quite well, but the one thing I did notice is they were light on units. So they might have gone all in and be like, oh, I'm going to take all these spells because I have the Spells Matters deck. But the problem is, if you're not careful, if you don't draw that build around card, then what is your deck really doing? And so this is still limited. You have to be careful on going all in on things. And so identifying what your shortcomings or the gaps in your deck are, you can help kind of facilitate that. Maybe you're all flyers, right? You went all in, you're like, oh yeah, we're totally Huru flyers, we're doing it. And you take all these flyers, but then you look at your unit base and you're like, wait, I have nothing on the ground to defend me from an aggressive deck, because obviously flyers are losing some stats to have the ability to fly and be evasive. So they make very horrible blockers. And so that's something you're like, okay, I need to pick up some Scaly Gruons or some, First Frost Shamans to kind of make sure that like I can make things happen and make sure I don't get ran over by these aggressive decks. And so that helps finish off your curve. So you go from one of those extremes where like if you draw your build around, you're an 8, and when you don't, you're a 4. Instead, now your deck sits somewhere around the 5 or 6 range, period, regardless of whether you draw your build around or not. And so these are the kind of things that kind of help solidify a deck to make sure you don't have a train wreck where you're just looking at your pile of cards and be like, is this a seal pool? This is absolutely atrocious. What am I supposed to do with this? The last thing I will say about this is that it is very important to try to still play it out, because like I said, this is limited. There is variance in every traditional card game or trading card game. And so, your opponent can very easily, there were times like, for example, I drafted a Martyr's Chains, and they were at least 2 games where we got up to 9 power and just never drew our Martyr's Chains. Or Martyr's Chains, not Martyrs. I don't know where I was going with that. Martyr's Chain. So same thing can happen to your opponent. They can keep a greedy hand and get stuck on 2, and you can still curve out and run them over. They can not draw the right cards to line up with what you're doing, and you can take them down. You never know. So I really highly suggest or urge you not to hit that resign button and still kind of salvage your train wrecks the best you can to play them out, because you never know. And I mean, from a practical standpoint, if you rack up 2 or 3 wins with the deck, then it at least manages to give you some of your gold back so you can draft again later. So yeah, guys, that is the main topic. A bit of a short one today, but I feel like it is something that we can kind of use in all formats, because it does happen sometimes, especially when we start to get bored with a format or get kind of greedy or kind of go on autopilot. And so it might just be me. Let me know. You might have never had a train wreck. I know I've tried to read signals a little too hard, and when you get someone that doesn't prioritize things the way that the general consensus does, then you get mixed signals, etc., etc. So it is what it is, but I like this one. Definitely want your feedback on it. Let me know what you think. If you have any additional pointers for train wrecks, definitely send them my way. You can either join the Discord and talk to me there, or once again, email, Twitter, all the good stuff. But that will do it for the main topic, which takes us to our What's the Play. This week, we actually just mentioned the play of the week earlier, and so I'm going to bring this game up. This is a draft deck that I feel like has quite a bit of consideration, because we know we have quite a bit of knowledge on our opponent's hand, and so it might change our plays. This is actually a What's the Play over the course of 2 different turns. So it is our opponent's turn. They are at 4 of 6 power with Fire, Justice, Primal, and a Shadow Splash. We are at 2 of 9 power with Genev. So Fire, Time, Primal. Fire, Time, Primal. Our opponent is at 10. We are at 19. And they have the 5/3 Centauri that every time you play a spell, it gets a +1/+1 and quick draw. And they just finished rereading a display of honor, which is the Ixtan display that gives a unit a +4/+4 in lifesteal this turn, draws 2 weapons from your void, or transforms an enemy unit into a 2/1 goat. Drawing the display would give them 3 cards in hand, and once again with 4 undepleted power. They are attacking into us, and we have a 2/1 goat because they used the display earlier, and that is kind of irrelevant at this point, but I'll mention it, that it has killer on it. We wanted to warp the Death Strike off the top of our deck, so we just gave it to our 2/1, which was our best unit at the time. We have a 2/6 Infuser, which is the one that lets you play, the Radiant lets you play or warp, or gives all your sigils warp, so you can play sigils off the top. We have a Fire Sigil in hand and a Porcelain Mask in play, giving both our guys Overwhelm. So our opponent plays the reread, getting back Display of Honor, and then they attack with a 6/4 quick draw Centaur. We know they have the Display of Honor in hand. Question here is whether you chump block or not. If you double block, you force their hand, because obviously they're attacking with a 6/4 quick draw. Actually, I take that back. You don't force their hand, because the quick draw will kill the goat, and so they don't have no worry, or the Infuser, so they have no worry of losing their guy. So my question is, do you block here, or do you take the damage, knowing that they have the Display of Honor in hand? If they play the Display of Honor, their Centauri will go up to a 7/5, then get the +4/+4, so we'll take 11, and they gain 11. I chose not to block here because it just seemed of minimal consequence. We were just going to throw away a unit, and then they could opt to not cast the display either way. So I figured having the most units on the board gave us the biggest advantage here. And so, sure enough, we do not block, but it turns out that they did have a barrel through. Let me double check. Yeah, they had a barrel through. So the barrel through did similar to what we had anticipated, where it gave their Centaur an additional +1/+1, as well as the +3/+3. So we ended up taking 10, going down to 9, but they gained no life. It is our turn, and we have a Time Sigil off the top of our deck, and we drew an Elysian Stranger. So obviously, at 10 power, we play the Elysian Stranger. My question to you is, here is the bigger what's the play, is whether, sitting back, and there is an argument, that is an argument. So here are all the lines of play that you can do. Okay, we can once again, we obviously play the Stranger, because there's absolutely no reason not to play the Stranger. So the question is, do you leave all 3 units back, knowing that they have the Ixtan display in hand, their display of what is it? Ideal display. The extra names always throw me off. I remember the names of the city. The Display of Honor. I'm sorry. Display of Honor. They have the Display of Honor in hand, right? You know it's coming down next turn, and once again, it makes their guy pretty vicious. So do you attack with 1 unit, either the goat or the Infuser? Do you attack with both units, the goat and the Infuser? Or do you simply not attack and leave all 3 units back on defense? Now, I decide that the Infuser is the most valuable unit I have, and if they have anything that does Overwhelm, we're just dead. I guess, well, I take that back. We wouldn't, let me see, let me do the math real quick. So if they play 2 spells, it will become a 7, and then without the pump, it'd be 11. So we wouldn't quite die, but we would lose our board. So that was the thing. I feel like losing our board would just kill us anyways. And so I decided to attack with just the Infuser. They obviously do not block because we have 1 card in hand. They have to play around the trick. And right now, us being Genev means they have minimal ways of dying to just 1 card. That leaves us back the 2/1 goat and the 2/2 stranger to block the 5/3. And I did that because that way, if they had a removal spell for one, we still had a chum block with the other. Of note, when we did attack with the infuser, let me actually see if we had a stop there. I'm trying to think real quick, so give me 1 second. Let me rewatch the video just for a second. Yeah, there was a stop. Yeah, there was a stop because their Sensari was exhausted. So we identified that they have a fast spell, but obviously playing 4 colors, it's hard to identify what it was. It could have easily been a furnish or whatnot. So we attack, and then they proceed to attack. So yeah, well, I guess that's the play right there. How would you have done it? Would you have left all 3 units back to block? Would you have attacked with the 2/1? Would you have attacked with the infuser, or would you have attacked with both? I chose to attack with the infuser. We pass the turn. Our opponent ends up playing the display as we anticipated. We double block, forcing them to play the display, because at this point they have not done a spell yet, and so their Sensari is still at 3 toughness. So forcing their hand to play the spell instead of just chump blocking with 1, I felt was like the correct play, because I'd rather get it out of their hand and put us both in a top deck war. So I block with both. They play the display, but then they followed up with a daring maneuver, giving their unit an additional +3 attack as well as overwhelm, which is enough to kill us. So tell me in the comments below. I feel like that was quite a discussion. We had a bit of a discussion on stream about it because it's very touchy. Like, we were somewhat on the back foot in that game. Our opponents in removal lined up very well against our unit base. So as you could tell, we weren't doing very hot. They were a identifiable spells matters deck. They played Svetya Sanctum. And so we knew they were kind of going all in on the spells matter thing. They had minimal units. Once again, their removal lined up well with ours. I don't think we drew any of our big units, or maybe that's what was turned into the 2/1 goat. So what would you have done there? Let me know if you would have done anything different, or if we were just kind of at a gas period. But yeah, guys, that will be the what's the play as usual. If you were watching this on YouTube, you saw the visual version on YouTube. But if not, I do have it uploaded on my Twitch highlights. Just look up what's the play 32 and it will be there. But that is going to do it from our show. So I want to thank you guys all so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. I hope you are continuing to enjoy this podcast, because I am enjoying making it and putting it out there for you. Let me know both positive and good feedback and negative feedback. Once again, I do stress the fact that if you guys do have any kind of negative feedback or thumbs down, or 2 stars or whatnot, please leave a reason or message me privately on what it is, because it might be something I can fix, and if it's not, then so be it. But you never know. Of course, you can catch me on Twitter at EJthePodcast, which is also the YouTube. Just search Eternal Journey on the YouTube search bar, or go to EJthePodcast. You guys can catch all my content there. You'll notify when I go live for streaming, as well as when I post new videos, etc., and podcasts. You can follow my real life stuff, my circus performances, my fire performances, cosplay, fitness, all that stuff on my Instagram, which is CaesarLabear7. And you can catch me streaming live every Sunday, Monday, Tuesday morning Central Time, twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. You can catch the Discord link in the description down below. And as always, once again, share, like, subscribe, hit the alert bell, rate, thumbs up, uptick, all that good stuff. I really appreciate it. It helps a lot. Tell your friends about us. By us, I mean me. And yeah, guys, that'll do it. So thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you got something out of this topic. Hopefully next week we can start talking about some more mechanics and spoilers. We'll see, because they did push back the set. And I kind of am waiting to do spoilers all when everything gets released. But who knows, maybe I will just kind of bite the bullet and do what every other podcast is doing and talk about a couple of them at a time. Let me know if you'd rather I do that as well. All right, that'll do it. So until next time, happy gaming.